100 women screaming in horror simultaneously is something that Herbert is going to treasure for a long, long time. He had offered forgiveness to his wives on the condition that they have to understand why he freaked out so badly when he woke up to them, beyond the fact that he'd been set up to be raped, and them the rapists. "You girls need a minute or two?" he asks after pausing the video while the first chestburster from the Alien franchise reveals itself. The acid blood of the Perez, as they call their facehugger pets, had freaked some of them out. The fact that it was violating the crew member freaked even more of them out further. But the infamous money shot of that first chestburster had gotten all of them. It's horrible. It was horrible for the actors too. The director hadn't told them what was happening, only that they should focus on the chest. He says, relishing the looks of horror. "It's like a demon trying to look like a baby," one of them shouts. It had been a relief to realize culturally he wasn't expected to have their names down for a long time. "Puris? Don't do that. Puris, do not do that." Another was chanting to herself as she cuddled three of her strange long-tailed crab-like pets. They came in more colors and patterns than bone white, but damn if they weren't freaky as hell to look at. He waited for the din of panic and horror to subside and everyone to gather their nerves. He couldn't help but feel smug in all this. Learning that he truly was in a harem anime with a huge amount of barely legal brides while being deeged to being barely legal himself was a shocker. But it explained their recklessness. They were mature enough physically for the urges to hit them like a hammer blow, but not mentally or emotionally mature enough to even technically move out of their homes. In short, if he was 14 now, then they were all 15 with all the stupid recklessness and childish selfishness it entailed. A human brain doesn't finish its development until its mid-20s on average. If the Zedin and Yaoya followed similar patterns, then things were just a huge clusterfuck thanks to that Thuna or V-Fin or whichever. Alien names went from borderline unpronounceable to normal without much middle ground, and the Zedin and Yaoya both used what seemed to a random handful from alphabet soup. Not always arranged in a way that makes sense either. Still, sympathy for the girls or not, he still had his gun on him. It was basically his security blanket until his own discomfort with the situation passed. Friendly or not, loving or not, apologetic or not, they were still a massive pack of massively murder-capable alien monsters with literally magic-infused armor and blades. Apparently, the acid for blood thing was on point too, but only if they charged their fluids with Axiom. Each of the girls here was basically a full xenomorph in capability, but built like a stripper and with the mindset of love-struck teenage girls. He was still deciding if this was a surreal heaven or hell with how into him the girls were. Either way, it was weird as all get out. The strange bit is, he felt a touch like a pedophile for being involved with all the teenagers, despite them all forcing themselves on him and the freaking conspiracy that had forced them together, being almost completely out of his control. "You ladies ready for more?" he asks as the room quiets down somewhat. "No? Do we have to?" "Oh, come on! We've paused right as the chestburster's first poking its head out. It still needs to escape and systematically wipe out most of the crew. A conspiracy needs to be uncovered. A last-second save, and there's the director's cut ending where the monster wins." Herbert calls out to the crowd, who start muttering all kinds of protests. "I'm not heartless. It's just this one, the next one, and the first two Predator movies. The rest of the series for both franchises really take a nosedive after the first two. There's more? We've got about 6 hours of solid entertainment ahead of us, if we don't have to keep pausing at every little bit of fake blood." Way, some of the nearby girls exclaim, and he chuckles heartily at it. "Oh, this is so funny. It was worth diving out that window to get entertainment like this." He laughs out loud as he settles in to wait for them to be ready for more. He'd seen enough schlocky movies, seen enough real blood, seen enough life to know just how fake all that was. Doesn't stop it from being entertaining on its own, but far more entertaining is the floor show his wives give him on a watch. They've mostly settled, so he turns on the movie again and has to resist cackling at the waves of women cringing at the sight of the movie's fake gore and the clear puppet or man in the suit as appropriate. The sheer gasp that passes through everything as Ash is revealed as an android working to try and get the monster to Wayland Yutani. It can survive in space. Some of them gasp near the end, and there's a sigh of relief as the engine destroys the monster, followed by a second after the credits start signifying the end of the movie. "So who's ready for the second one?" he asks and bursts out laughing at the resounding "No!" from the rest of the room. All right, you get a pass for a while," he concedes before considering. "So, what do you girls want to do then?" There's chatter around him, and the concession ends up being the swimming pool. "Are you certain that's allowed? I mean, we are guests in Ambassador Halela's estate, and..." He begins to raise protest, and he's brushed aside in a flurry of movement and talk of bathing suits. "Apparently it's fine," he notes with a smile. Things had calmed down wonderfully and to a manageable level. The way the massive marriage worked was actually rather pleasant, at least at this point. To put things simply, all the girls were friends, and he was their boyfriend. But the responsibility for being spontaneous, for coming up with ideas and paying for things were on them. There was no fighting over him as they all shared him, and if one of the girls wasn't close to him, it was considered her own damn fault for not trying hard enough. At least that was how he had managed to translate the rambling explanation from Barizi. The only one of them whose name he had down for certain, it all was panning out as they were respecting his desire not to be jumped on and generally treated each other like a large group of friends. Of course, this leads into the biggest problem with them. They won't leave him alone. Not like they won't stop talking to him or stop bothering him. They literally will not let him out of their sight. There's always around 5 of them about a half heartbeats away at the most, even when he's in the bathroom. They are always right there, only separated by a thin door. And he hasn't caught them in the act yet, but he's positive they're putting their heads against it to hear everything he does. He asked them to let him have some space for a bit, and they did, but only for a bit. Then there's the ambassador's suite, more like gigantic mansion all to herself. 10 floors total going up and down, an entire massive chunk of the spire, and yet it was still modestly sized compared to other systems. It was normal, and it was the size of a large hotel by itself. The whole place was opulent to the point of parody and made Admiral Cistern's office look like a shoebox in the corner of the closet by comparison. And that was a royal office with several side rooms for more private meetings and even personal chambers in the back. The 100 of them had a run of 8 of the 10 floors of Ambassador Halela's estate, and one of the floors was set aside for their personal use. One of the 8 contained a large swimming pool with numerous chairs and even a bar, 4 times the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. It was beyond huge. Even all 101 of them in at the same time would not overfill it or even cause it to splash out too much, and it was part of a modest estate given to an ambassador as part of an embassy. The sheer amount of wealth casually on display is absurd. The galaxy has a mind-boggling amount of wealth and resources, and he doesn't know where it's going or being directed. He had reported it. He had reported it repeatedly, yet could not find the why. It's offered freely for morale purposes, but he just can't figure it out. It can suck to be a grunt. I'm not qualified to untangle things. He mutters to himself too lowly for the women around him to hear. Which really summarized the largest problem the Dauntless and Earth was facing as a whole. The ship was bloated and far too often, the people falling into place to take advantage of circumstance and actually learn or spy were the fillers. The extra bodies dragged along in case things went wrong, but they hadn't. Preparation may prevent piss-poor performance, but too much preparation can take away from the actual matter at hand. We need a spy in here. Not some jumped-up shotgunner, basic Axiom training or not. Excuse me, dear girls. I do so beg your pardon, madam, but I must speak with your husband. 1,000 pardons, my dear. Terribly sorry. If you could just allow me to pass ever so... A very proper and old voice says as Sir Philip weaves his way through the crowd. Ah, there you are, Mr. Jameson. If could borrow you for a minute or 3... I have a bit to discuss with you, primarily about your effects off the Dauntless. The proper old man says, and Herbert nods. Excellent. Now, if you don't mind, I feel that my English is getting a tad rusty, and would appreciate it if we could continue our conversation in the language of jolly old England, if you'd be so kind. Certainly, Herbert says, And Philip nods as he takes him by the shoulder and leads him a bit of the way from the crowd. He waves them a bit away, and there's some giggling at that, but they comply. "How are you holding up?" Sir Philip asks straight away. "Well enough. They look weird, but they're love-struck teenagers with all the stupidity and recklessness that entails." Herbert reports getting a nod from the proper old spy. "Excellent. Now, you don't have the training to work as a spy or informant properly, so we have to address that. I need you to nod at this point," Philip says, and Herbert nods. "Well done. To this end, we are placing a box set of novels into your personal effects. We've doctored them and they're twice as long now. On the back of each page holds instructions on spy work and the like. The front of each page has the novel as usual so that if you're questioned, you can start reading out of it. It's an old and somewhat inoffensive series known as The Bellegarde by David Eddings. Please gesture towards your room while nodding and saying something. As you have requested, good sir. In that direction is my chamber." Herbert says with a gesture, and Sir Philip nods. "Very good. Your effects and your training manuals will be in your room before dinner, and don't fret, dear boy. You may not be ready for this, but we have your back unto the very end." Sir Philip says with a gentle smile, and Herbert lets out a huge sigh of relief and gives the proper old man a hug. Yes, I understand you've had a hard time. No need to overindulge," Sir Philip says as the girls let out an awe of delight. "Oh, but I do." They'll remember only gibberish and be unable to repeat a thing, as all they will remember is the hug, Herbert remarks, and Sir Philip lets out a laugh. "You'll do just fine, dear boy. Don't you worry. You're doing just fine," Sir Philip says, smiling on him as he pats the boy on the shoulder.